Today's episode has been brought to you by Schedulicity.
Hello and welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Crow. I'm a mom of three, a yoga teacher, and a trainer and consultant who works for yoga teachers. And this podcast was created for you so that each and every week you can feel connected to a supportive community and the information that you need to keep going. Because right now, connected yoga teachers, I don't know about you, but I need my supportive community around me lately. I feel like we've had a very rough year. As I'm recording this live, I feel like we've had a very rough week as humans on this planet. And I just want to be really honest. Recording the intro and the outro for this episode has been one that I have been putting off. I know that it's a controversial topic. I know that it can divide people, friends, families, and we as yoga teachers might have been told that we need to stop talking about politics, or maybe we were told that as we were growing up. So I just want to say the discomfort that maybe you were feeling when you saw the episode topic come out, or maybe you're like, what is Shannon going to say right now? Especially with what's going on in North America, especially what's happening in the US right now. I just wanted to be really honest with you that this is not a conversation I ever saw coming to the podcast when I started it almost 4 years ago. And this week I even shared with a few friends how I was like, why can't we just talk about the anatomy of the shoulder? And this year has not been the year to be only talking about that. This episode today is really fueled by many of your questions and conversations inside the Connected Yoga Teacher group, in your emails that you've been sending to me, in our consultation calls that I've had with yoga teachers over the past year, and the struggles that I see all of you sharing. We've talked about on the podcast before how important it is for us to be informed and how ahimsa and social justice are connected. How the foundations of yoga and the philosophy of yoga really ties into all aspects of our life. As I was struggling thinking, I need to sit down and talk about politics and yoga in what feels like a really tumultuous time. I honestly don't know what is even going to be happening in the world come Monday when this releases live and in real time. I could have never predicted what just happened at the Capitol building in Washington. All that said, though, we still have yoga classes to teach, yoga students showing up, people looking towards us as community leaders, some of us, the people who are looking after nervous systems and bodies and spirits and minds in this world. And so this is why I am so glad that we have Chara Caruthers and Maria Kirsten on the podcast today. It is good timing for us to have a listen to their thoughts about finding that balance and how this impacts us as yoga teachers. Back in episode 173, I shared an interview that I did with Chara and Maria. And in a little bit, I'll give you some backstory of actually how that came about. But in today's episode, I wanted to dig into how yoga is informing your politics and how yoga and politics do intersect in sometimes some surprising ways. We also look at some really fundamental questions like whether the body is political and what it means to live a quote-unquote yogic life. And before we dive in, I want to give a huge shout out of gratitude to you for showing up for this conversation today. You might have thought, oh my gosh, I've heard enough about politics, but you're here, and I am super grateful for that. I am also grateful for our sponsor, Schedulicity, who also is a company who does not shy away from tough topics or challenging technology questions from yoga teachers. Let's hear our hot tip of the week from the team over at Schedulicity.
Hello, Connected Yoga Teachers. This is Courtney with the Schedulicity Hot Tip of the Week. Sometimes when you're starting your business, it can feel like all of the responsibilities on your shoulders. But our award-winning support team is here to help. You can reach us 7 days a week for a phone call, live chat, or email question. When you're on scheduleacity.com, click the purple speech bubble button in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and say hello. We love to help, and we're excited to watch things fall into place for your business. You got into this business to do yoga, not to have to run a business. So let us handle the business and you handle the yoga.
Thank you so much, Team Schedulicity. Now, as I said, if you listen back to episode 173, you will have already met and know Chara and Maria. But if you haven't, here's a quick intro. Chara is a registered yoga teacher and certified yoga therapist who's been practicing yoga since 1993. Chara is also a wellness coach and an Ayurveda practitioner. She's the founder of Bliss Body and Soul, where she offers Ayurveda courses, workshops, and other things. Maria has been teaching accessible yoga to grownups and beginners since 2000. She's the founder of Yoga for Grownups and is committed to principles of inclusion and to making yoga safe and accessible for everyone. Maria also does work in the area of yoga for mental health and yoga therapy. And if you want to listen to a really heartwarming podcast, head on over and listen to the Live Like You Love Yourself podcast with Chara and Maria. Over there, they talk about how to live, age, parent, and grow up in a way that feels balanced and authentic. One other note here, Chara and Maria both currently live in Australia. They're from the United States, and as many of you know, I'm from Canada. So there was this really unique perspective where we could kind of gather our experience as residents of 3 different places. Welcome, Maria and Chara. It is great to have you here. So the last time we chatted was at the beginning of June, and there was a lot happening in the world. There's still a lot happening in the world. But before we get into talking about yoga and politics, I'm really excited that we're going to talk about that today. Before we get there, tell me, maybe Maria, you want to start first. Tell me about the work that you do and who you do it for.
Okay. At the moment, it's been nice. I've been come back to myself because I'm a yoga teacher in my town, and I teach older people, older grownups, I call them, twice a week, which has been really lovely, and do some yoga therapy with people. But I do I normally travel and teach how to teach older grownups and how to teach yoga for mental health. And I have put the mental health one online, and I'm busy filming the older grownups one. So yesterday I got to teach for accessible yoga, the training, the yoga for mental health. So that's kind of what I have going and what's available to the world out there at the moment. That's sort of what I do and who I teach.
That's amazing. Do you mean you taught for the Accessible Yoga Conference?
Not for the conference. I did speak at the conference last year, but this was on their training. It was
nice.
Yeah, just a quick. But still, it's exciting. I was honored because I like Jeevana's work, and I like the whole accessible yoga thing is about opening yoga to everybody and making people feel safe and seen. So it's nice. It's kind of another prong to the trauma sensitive approach. Mm-hmm. So one way to make us safe. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And accessible is another way to make us safe. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah. So, Chara, tell me about the work that you do and who you do it for.
Well, I am also a yoga teacher and a yoga therapist and also an Ayurvedic practitioner. And I do teach classes to everyone, regular folks, near here where I live. And I do some teaching online as well. But mostly I'm a wellness coach and more like an Ayurvedic educator or health counselor. So I work with individuals of all stripes who are looking to improve their wellness, who are looking to, feel better, and also who are looking to learn a little bit about the ancient science of Ayurveda. And very recently, which I'm really excited about, I've created a training for yoga teachers all around Ayurveda so that they are well prepared to share Ayurveda or to experience it in their lives and also to share it in their yoga classrooms and studios. And that's pretty exciting to me, actually.
Connected Yoga Teachers, I wanted to pop in here really quickly just to give you a bit of a backstory of how timing has worked with this podcast interview and a previous one that Chara, Maria, and I did. They had first asked me to talk on their podcast about pelvic health. And right at the time was the murder of George Floyd. So we didn't talk about that topic, obviously. We talked about the impact for our yoga teachers and the yoga students and the world and how this related to yoga. We shared this in a previous podcast episode, and I'll make sure that we link to it in the show notes in case you want to go back and have a listen to that one. And then today's episode was actually recorded on the evening of the very first presidential debate. It hadn't happened yet. We recorded it right before. We did it live. We had no idea how that was going to happen. And we hadn't even worked hard to plan it that way. It was just time zones and life and rescheduling, and that's where it landed. And I'm recording this for you now in the middle of January. And we have just seen a lot more happen, mostly at the Capitol building in Washington. And as a Canadian, I am still watching this, and I still feel like it's very relevant to our yoga teacher community, to every person on the planet to be watching and to see how then we can turn around and serve our yoga students. That's why I'm so glad that you get to hear from Maria and Chara. Okay, let's get back into the interview. The next thing I asked Maria and Chara is where they live and how they vote.
I live in Australia. Maria and I live in Australia. And so I vote from here, from Australia. So it's been an interesting process in 2016 and even more interesting this year, as you can imagine. But I vote from here.
Okay, you vote from there and vote in the US, like you mail your ballot in.
Yeah. Well, actually, I did that in 2016. So that I was actually sent a paper ballot in the mail. But this year, I am actually voting via email. So there's a number of states around the country that allow voting in various different formats. If you're an overseas voter, or if you're a military personnel who's stationed somewhere overseas, you have the option in a few different states. And luckily enough, the state that I'm technically resident in the United States in terms of my tax returns and all that sort of stuff, is one of those states that allows it. So the process has been absolutely amazing. I've been so impressed with what it's been like just to vote. And it's made it actually pretty easy, which I'm happy about, because I did wonder how challenging it was actually going to be to make it happen.
Right. One side note here, Connected Yoga Teachers, Chara shared that she's also an Australian citizen as well, so she votes in Australia also. And Maria, what about you? Where do you vote?
Well, yeah, despite my American accent and growing up in New York, I actually was never an American citizen. So I really never voted until I became an Australian citizen after I was married. So at 29 or 30 or something like that. And what I love about, so I vote in Australia, and I walk down the block to my local school and I vote, and it is really easy. And it's compulsory. So you get a fine if you don't vote, and you got to really organize. If you're away, you've got to organize what you're going to do. You can mail in and do things like that. But I love that you can't just vague out on the whole thing and be like, oh, and then complain later. Everybody's got to pony up and engage with it and kind of take responsibility for it.
I'm popping in here again, Connected Yoga Teachers, just because I wanted to get the exact wording that is in our group rules inside of the Connected Yoga Teacher Facebook group. So I was telling Chara and Maria that in our group rules, we state, so the heading for the group rule is no religion, politics, or dietary beliefs, please. And then underneath it says, this group is not the place to post your views on religion, politics, and dietary choices. We want everyone to make their own choices on these matters and not feel shame or judgment. So I wanted to get their opinion on how that group rule lands now that we're having this conversation of how yoga and politics is connected. Tell me, Maria, if you want to start, how do you think that yoga and politics and voting go together? Because I think a lot of the time we try and keep that out of our classes and out of our offerings.
Yeah, that's right. And I know what you were intending in that rule, and I do agree with it. I don't think having poster after poster that you should vote this way or that would be constructive. And I don't tend to kind of tell people my politics in my classes either. In other words, how I voted. But I do talk about issues and about awareness of issues and how they interact with me as a human, as an organism. So I try not to preach or push, just like you don't want to push or pose on anyone. You don't try and push your opinion, but we're opening up an awareness and opening up the capacity to be clear on what you think and feel, and to have a kind of internal censor, and also have a good cognitive mind to kind of parse through the fake stuff from the real stuff. And I think we're supporting those things, and we're supporting that self-awareness of what's comfortable and safe and lovely. So I think yoga has a huge role in politics because it empowers people to sense what's right and good and safe and comfortable, and what sits well with them. And that, I hope, informs how they vote. Now, they may make a completely different decision to me, but that's democracy. And I think that's great. If they've done that checking and that thinking and that investigation, and then they vote differently to me, hats off to you. That's okay. That's what the beauty of democracy is. So I guess I don't know whether I've answered the question, but I feel like that's how yoga and politics intersect. And the ability to have respect for somebody's different. You know, I mean, I think it can be frustrating when someone says they're voting completely opposite, especially when it's very divisive, or especially when there's lots of conspiracy theories. It can be arousing and upsetting and frustrating, and it's so constructive to act on a kind of charged way. Whereas if we can say, "Ooh, how does that feel?" and create that pause, I think you're going to have a much better chance of having some kind of a discussion and an exchange, rather than coming like a bull out of the gates with, red or blue stuck to your forehead.
Right. I want to hold on to that, like that charged and kind of the friction that comes along with it. But Chara, do you have anything to add to that? How you think yoga and politics and voting come together?
Yeah, I think yoga and politics intersect in a lot of different places. And I get that I totally understand you wanting to put a rule in the group around, trying to keep politics out, because these days politics is incredibly divisive. And I think part of the reason for that is because, well, I mean, I can't even simplify it to a single simple thing. But I think what we've gotten away from is this understanding of the bigger issues and understanding of the impacts of the political system on our individual experiences. And we're kind of hanging out in these, around these two big poles with this understanding that this is what it means to be involved in politics. And so what that ends up creating in all kinds of environments, whether it's a Facebook group or a yoga studio, is this divisiveness, people feeling like they have to defend whatever their position might be. I don't honestly think I've ever needed my yoga more than in the last 4 years. And part of the reason for that is because what is happening in the world on all varying levels, and political plays a very big part in that, is affecting my everyday, is affecting how I feel in my body in this moment, is affecting the choices that I make, the people that I engage with. And the other way that I think that my yoga has helped in this, or it has helped me in dealing with the situation that we're all dealing with at the moment, or I should say the political landscape that we're living through or living in at the moment, is I've had to notice what my patterns are that have been defined by society, right? You take a side, you believe in something and you defend it to the death and you don't want to hear anything else. And that, I think, is what causes this divisiveness that we're all experiencing. And so for me, what my yoga has helped me to do, and to me, what I'm realizing, yoga is something different for all of us at different times in our lives. But for me, my yoga has been a reminder of the way that I want to be in the world. I keep thinking about that idea of ahimsa, and Ranji Roy and Dave Charlton, who are students of Peter Hersnack, who's a student of Desikachar, they've defined this, and I love this, ahimsa, as allowing the other to be as they are. And so I've had to try to hold that in my heart as I read crazy reports about people doing, things that I would normally consider to be quite crazy. And I've had to try to find some compassion across the board. And it has certainly been challenging, but I feel as though that is really that's what we need. That's really what we need in order to create a system, political or otherwise, that's going to truly support all of us.
Oh, this is so good. Say that again. Ahimsa is
allowing the other. So they talk about ahimsa they talk about the yamas as being our defining our relationship with the world. And the niyamas is our relationship with ourselves. And of course, our relationship with the world mirrors our relationship with ourselves. But they talk about ahimsa. And I love this so much, as allowing the other to be as they are.
I love that idea of that, because I think yoga, that developing compassion is not something you just whip out of your bag like that you prepared earlier. Yeah. I think if you sense into your own body and sense when you get sort of dysregulated or when you get unable to kind of settle and be present, it's when we're not safe. It's when we feel in some way threatened or like hemmed in or whatever it is. And so if you flip it on someone when they're coming at you, it's usually because they have their foot in a trap. Because why otherwise would they care or would they need? So in some way they're feeling threatened. And I think that's the danger of the divisiveness that happens these days, is that everyone gets further and further away. So they feel more and more threatened. And so they become more and more irrational. And the idea is, if you can use your yoga to kind of settle down and just think, hang on a second, we're all surviving here. We're okay. You can calm down and then not react in such a, not be so reactive, I guess. So be more responsive and receptive and let the other be as they are and think, ooh, what's scaring them?
It's also, I think, an acknowledgement of the fact that life is nuanced. There isn't any, you can look at somebody and they can talk about, how they believe in whatever it is. I don't even want to dive into any particular issues or crazy or, or touch points or anything. But what we see in front of us and what we're hearing has a story behind it.
Yeah.
And, yoga has always been about creating that space. You always quote that Viktor Frankl, between, I don't even know it, you know it.
Between stimulus and response, there is a space. Ideally, because often there isn't a space. Your partner says something and you're like, bang, with your response, and then you're like, shoot. But stimulus and response, there's a space, and it's in that space that you have a choice. And in your choice lies your growth and your freedom. And yoga is about making that space.
Yep, exactly. And these days we're so prone to writing people off if the words out of their mouths don't match with our own view of the world. And for me, yoga has created that space. It's created that space, even just to acknowledge that whatever someone is saying or experiencing or doing, there's a story behind it.
So then I'm curious, are either of you bringing this into your classes for your students who are feeling that, who are feeling like, oh my gosh, all of a sudden my neighbor just revealed who they're voting for and it's completely opposite to me, or I see my friend posting something on social media and what's wrong with them, and all of the things that have happened this year. We're in a pandemic. We've had fires all over the world. You both in Australia, in the US, in Canada, everywhere. the murder of George Floyd and the social justice movement that's happening all over. All of these things our students are walking in. Now we have an election in the US, and it seems like a very divisive one, as you said. So we have bodies walking in or joining us on Zoom, super stressed out. Do we let them leave it all outside the door, or do we do something?
I address it explicitly because I see it as my job, and I so we'll do the class. We're doing hips and shoulders and things. The things they expect. But I'm always talking to them about how their yoga develops their resilience and their awareness and their ability to notice when they get tense. I give them one too many instructions and they clench. And then how do you calm down when you're clenched? How do you notice you're clenching? And then how do you chill out? Or how do you could also flop. How do you arise a little bit or arouse a little bit if your method of opting out is flopping? And then I'll, without talking about anything in particular, I'll just say, times are weird and it's weird out there. And your job is first to be a calm presence, because you will exude that and calm the people around you. I mean, it creates it's like a good infection. It creates a nice contamination of peace and of safety. And I think that is our most powerful job. And I think it is political, but it's person by person, I guess. Chara?
Right.
Yeah, I agree with so much of what you're saying. I address it in some ways explicitly and in some ways implicitly. So we're here in Australia. So, in many ways, we have a bit of space around some of the political stuff. There's a whole lot of political things happening here in Australia as well. Nothing like as intense as in the US. But I don't think it's possible for us for people to leave any of their experience outside the door. We are carrying it with us in every cell of our body. And so for me, similar to Maria, I talk about themes around this stuff, in part because I feel like it's easier for people to, one, I feel like it's what people actually need. I don't think we need to be having a debate in their yoga class around, who to vote for or this or that. But also because I feel like people inherently recognize when we talk about things like resilience or when we talk about things like rest, they inherently recognize this is what my body needs in order to go the distance. And I think we all know, and you've talked with Michelle Cassandra Johnson, and we've talked with her as well on our podcast. We all know that any change that's going to happen, will require time, and it will require resilience for all of us, and it will require our own ability to choose ourselves. And so for me, in my classes, I do a lot of that. I do a lot of work around that idea of ahimsa, around trying to build this environment where people feel like they have a choice. And they feel like whatever choice that is, it's supported. It's supported in here. And then I try to reinforce that they have that choice out there too. And so that they can feel empowered, even if they can feel empowered to do a child's pose all class long if they want. And when they leave, they can feel empowered to choose themselves, or they can feel empowered to, to make whatever choices they need to in their lives, maybe around politics or social justice or whatever it is.
This is so good, because even if none of this was happening in the world, what would that world be like? And we walk into a class and someone's talking about resilience, it's going to land for everyone in a different way. They might be dealing with something at home or inside themselves. And I love how you just talked about one example, this making a choice in your yoga class. Am I going to stay in child's pose the entire class? That would be a choice that we make, and then carrying that out into our daily lives, which is what we do all of the time. Where do you think the discomfort comes from for yoga teachers who are like, well, one thing I hear from yoga teachers is, I'm not voting. I'm not voting. I'm not political. I'm a yoga teacher. I believe that we're all one. I'm trying to think of some of the messages that I hear.
Yeah, that's a privileged position to take. It feels like if you're privileged, you can sit home and not do that. And whereas I think for a lot of other people, it's a really, really going to be an important choice. And so if you're privileged, there's kind of an obligation to come out of that comfy living room. But that may not be why. Their system may not be able to take it. They may become so upset by it that is their way of surviving and keeping their equilibrium. And maybe that is what they need, is not to engage. But I think if we think of yoga as building our resilience and our capacity to tolerate stuff, I'd love to go live in a retreat forever. I'd like made for me 3 meals a day and a room cleaned and la-di-da or whatever. But even if I had to sweep the garden, it just takes away those things. Living in the world is hard, and sometimes you got to rise to the occasion, and other times you've got to know when to rest, and that I think is this. We're building that strength, that vagal tone, that ability to regulate, that ability to go out. And if you can't, then I guess that would be maybe a better thing to say than I'm not going to vote, which is I can't engage politically because I find it so upsetting. I can't keep my equilibrium. Helps a bit, but I'm not sure if it's going to work that well. I want people to vote really badly. I want people to yoga and I want them to engage, but I don't want to make people go through trauma that they can't handle. But I think that's what it is. It comes down to fear. What do you think, Chara?
Oh man, I think yoga has woken me up to the fact that I've been asleep around the idea of politics. I agree with you that it's a very privileged position to take, that I'm just not going to play. I'm not going to be involved. Why? Because my life's great. Why do I even need to choose this? But what we're starting to see is that everyone is impacted. There are protests and global warming, all of these, everyone is impacted, all the way from those larger issues right down to what's happening and how we're experiencing all of this in our own bodies. I feel like being human is a practice, and as part of that practice, we have to be willing to engage with the world around us because it defines who we are and who we can be. And so if we're saying, I don't know, too hard, I feel like at some point, like anything, like yoga talks about karma and the things that we do, at some point we will be feeling the consequences of those choices. And if we're somebody who's privileged, it may take a little longer, who knows? But regardless, we will be feeling the consequences of those choices. And so, yes, politics is hard and it feels messy and all the rest of it, but politics is not voting. We have to understand that.
No,
all of the stuff that we're seeing and the nastiness and the stuff we're reading in the media and all of that, we have to be willing to look underneath that to all of these people who are working every single day to make life better across the country for people at all levels. We have to see that and not just this, the stuff that's floating to the top, really. We need to be willing to see things, as they are, and to engage with our responsibility to the whole.
This really, when you're talking about this responsibility, it's making me think of something that I just heard on the news here in Canada today. I heard that our government promised clean drinking water to our Aboriginal people within 6 months from now. 6 months from now, they had put that on, and now they're saying, oh, but now we have COVID. And for me, as a privileged white person living in Canada, I could sit back and think, I have clean drinking water. I don't have to do anything in this. and my entire community and my country will hurt if I make that choice.
Mm-hmm.
Or I could start to get vocal about it and say, look, I voted for you. I'm not going to vote for you. We're all living in a pandemic and we're all learning. Like I can start to get, for me, it feels like I'm angry about it. That's what it feels like. Like I feel like I'm upset. I'm angry. I feel like it's unfair. And I'm okay with that. And so I'm curious to know, like, both of you feel free to jump in on this one. Like politics does wind us up a little bit. How do we balance out? How do we find that pause, but also action?
Yeah.
That's the hard thing.
It is.
Because I think one thinks a lot of things, but then what action will you take? And that hit me really when the week we spoke the first time was the week where everyone was putting their black square up because of the death of George Floyd, and also, especially if you were white, to say, okay, I'm not going to hold the stage this week. Was that enough? I hear Resmaa Menakem say, it's really about action. It's so easy to do a post or how do you turn this activation into something? And in that, I think that's probably why the difficulty with modern politics is we all feel very isolated and individual. And we used to have to gather in the square to read the newspaper. You'd have to kind of go get the news. You'd go get your messages, and so there was bad things to it too, but there was a sense of community, and community means that you can unite with people and create some action. I know the internet, we can do it too, but for you to go rattling your chain on Capitol Hill to say, I think I want that, you need to unite with people and create some kind of movement and find some people to do it together, to turn that action into something that's going to look like policy and procedure and make a difference to those people who are sitting there without clean water.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the cogs of the political system sometimes seem very complex, and that complexity and multi-level nature makes people feel powerless often.
Yes.
And as soon as you asked about that, I thought about a couple things. The first thing I thought about was in Ayurveda we say the foundation of longevity is what you do every day. And the idea of that is that you just take one small action every day, self-care or something. You take one small action. In other words, you do what you can do, and you make that your practice. And what I actually think is not enough of us are asking that simple question: what can I do? We get caught up in the idea that making a difference means, is far beyond my capacity as an individual. So I'll just hang out over here.
Right.
And honestly, there are so many things that we can do as individuals. Even just a slight shift in the way that we think about the world can change the way that we interact with people, the choices we make. Maybe even, it might mean that we make donations or that we engage in volunteering or whatever. But I think it has to start with us asking, what can I do? And also the other thing I was thinking about was the idea of tapas. We have this sense as a society, and I think that's because, maybe since the Industrial Revolution, and we've all been building, our lives have been about trying to create more and more convenience and comfort. And so we have this sense that, one, we are entitled to a good amount of comfort. Like that's really what life is meant to be about. But I think when it really matters, we all can recognize and acknowledge that important things are challenging to make happen. They are, whether that's, I don't know, losing 5 pounds or practicing your yoga every day or making larger change to the world around us, right? Saving us from climate change. And so I think if we can engage with the world with that as an understanding, one, I'm just going to do what I can. And two, it may not be easy, You know, I'm hoping that that's a container or a context that will keep us in action. Because if there is no action, then there's no change. I do think one of the gifts of yoga is that it can give us, I should say, or can offer or invite us to be able to hold two ideas that seem completely opposite,
Yeah,
to hold those things at the same time, to hold those in our beliefs.
I agree. Have conversations. I mean, here we run podcasts and things like that. I think that's been lost in the slinging match back and forth. I think
Like,
if you have a conversation, you are prepared to let the other person respect the other person as they are.
yeah.
I think Judith Lassiter said, and I'm not sure if it's hers, is that really listening is a willingness to be changed.
And that is definitely a position that I've been taking a lot this year, in part because if you've ever had that experience, and man, it's a whole complex of sensations, and because it means you have to let go of something that you may be holding on to so very tightly. And I can even just thinking of even just describing it now, I can think about how it feels. And you have to expand your awareness first just to be able to hear something. And then there's this feeling. It's an amazing experience to have your life, your mind changed, I think. And so I am always inviting that because I feel like we grow and we expand, even if we're just willing to engage with that.
Well, you're
I feel
raising
like
teenagers. I just finished raising teenagers.
Mm.
It's teenagers. I remember learning in like some sociology subject in occupational therapy. Teenagers have a really important role in the life course to be the rebel and hold everything up to question.
Mm.
And if you just dig in on your parental point of view, which would be quite easy to reproduce what your parents said to you, but there's always that thing. It's like maybe they're right, maybe. And I think that idea that maybe this person is right and maybe I'm wrong. Oh my God.
It's never that. It's always both and. The person who put the comment.
Exactly.
It's always both but there's a leap even to be able to get to the ability to hold that.
And I also think that it's when you truly do it on a explicit level, but also on like a body presence listening. Someone can feel when you're receiving them,
Mm-hmm.
or when you're ready with your armor, like ready for the next thing. There's a receptivity that is an embodied receptivity. I think that happens when you're ready to be changed.
Totally. And you know what? I think I'm always saying the way that and this is Mahatma Gandhi. What is it? Be the change you wish to be in the world. And I always the way that we start to make change is by starting with ourselves. And you've described it exactly. You just our ability to be open to hear. There's a communication there to the other person. They're now relaxing. They're now, being more connected to themselves, their authentic thoughts about something or their authentic beliefs, as opposed to their patterns of defense or whatever else it might be. Mm-hmm. And then we start to make these incremental changes just by doing those things.
This is amazing. I'm thinking of, as a yoga teacher, we all have experience where we learn something as a yoga teacher and then we learn something new and we're like, oh gosh, I'm going to have to change the way I teach. I remember learning about belly breathing and then taking a 2-day workshop and thinking, I owe all of my students an apology for how I teach. And I wrote an apology email to them. They loved it. It turned into a blog post. It's been one of the best. And this was the moment of like, I'll listen to this. I'll try this out. I'll see how it feels. And then I'll get feedback from like, try it out in my own life, try it out with my students and ask them. And this is the same thing in, when I say that, so it's usually my dad and I have very different political views, some same, some overlapping, but mostly very different. And it's like I love hearing his opinion about it. One, because there's banter, which is, it's fun. I don't know how to package that up when things feel not fun, when someone has a different political view.
I do.
Yeah.
The polyvagal theory explains that. It's that, so you can be activated and have a sympathetic reaction, fight, flight, you're ready. You are not listening. In fact, your ability to express, receive, relate is gone. But it's possible to have a mixed state where, because of social communication, because there's a relationship and there's a calmness and a kind of receptivity, you can banter, which is a little like kids when they play fight. It's like someone's going to get hurt, but because they know it's playing, it looks a lot like it. Or dogs that are like, it looks like they're having a fight, but they're not. They're playing. They're activated, but they feel safe. And I think that's a really important thing. And then you can sense in your body when something gets threatening. Mm-hmm. And then you're hang on, this isn't a fun conversation anymore. This is no longer a dinner party conversation. I'm getting mad at you, or you are making me afraid. And I think it's a real skill to be able to have a lovely, vigorous argument, but not get tipped into that aggression kind of thing.
Connected yoga teachers, this made me really curious about how we, as yoga teachers, can balance this staying informed and not being overly triggered. Maria, Chara, and I talked about our nervous system and what impact the news or social media sometimes has on it. And I asked them to share their thoughts and opinions on this. How do you stay informed then? Where do you go for your updates? Because it is our responsibility then, if we're going to vote, it's really our responsibility to know what's happening.
Yeah.
Personally, how do you both do that?
I have a number of news organization apps that I look at each morning to see what has arisen. It probably could be more diverse, but, whether it's The Guardian, The New Yorker, the New York Times, or whatever, that's a few different things, the ABC in Australia. And I'll just, in a way, I don't know whether I'm cross-referencing. They're probably all giving me what I want, but just to hear around it. And I listen to some podcast news things that I like, the Daily on the New York Times and things like that, just to hear explorations. But I'm always keeping in mind that it's a particular point of view, that the New York Times has a point of view, and the ABC in Australia has a point of view. So I always try and keep that distance and say, okay, and let's hear about it. And it's nice when different interviewers that I like bring on opposite points of view. I like it when they engage with the opposition and hear what they say, because it's that kind of conversation and debate is not energy stealing. And, exactly. I know to watch a pointless slinging match is so pointless, but to watch an educated debate where people present their beliefs, and then we take that position where I might be convinced otherwise, or I might be changed, and it seems constructive.
Right.
Yeah.
That's so good.
Similar to Maria, I get news from a number of different news outlets, reputable as much as I can handle, or as much as I can choose, news outlets. And I also try to get news from a number of different places around the world. So obviously we have Australia here, and then a few different papers in the States, or a few different outlets in the States, and then also like the BBC and the Guardian, like things that are happening in the UK, just to get a sense overall of what's happening. And it's not all just political; it's just what's happening in the world. Because I think one thing that I've certainly recognized this over the last 4 years is that we are such a global. We're such a global culture. So much of what happens in one place impacts what's going on in the other. I mean, even seeing how my students in class are impacted by the political issues that are happening in the US. It makes me understand that everyone's experiencing this in a different way, and the implications are different. And so being able to look at, the way that it's being reported and the way that people are experiencing this in different places, to me, just gives me a bit of a wider view, which I find useful, as well as just hearing what friends are saying and ask different opinions. Like Maria was saying, The Daily is a fantastic podcast. I love that one.
Yes.
Yeah.
It has great stories to it. I listen to the Newsworthy, which is with Erica Mandy, and that's how I get my U.S. news because it's unbiased news and it's quick.
But it seems unbiased, yeah.
And then I listen to CBC, but you're making me think that I could listen to a few more. Like I usually take it in podcast wise and sometimes need to read it as well.
The conversation in Australia is also very good.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
It sort of gives you a daily newsletter and it's independent journalists. So it's, they're not, I don't know who they're paid by, but I think they're paid by donation. They're not owned by anyone.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. I wonder if anyone else has suggestions. You can put them in the comments of like how you stay informed. One thing that we saw in 2020 is it's really important to stay informed. Like when there was the whole like blackout square and this week will be silent. If you weren't paying attention to the news in any way, some people were being called out for, why do you have your ads running right now? Other people were saying like, it's time to shut your ads off or your promotions that you're doing. And so if we want to be business people who are also, have a pulse on what's happening in the world, I think it's important that we stay informed. I want you to share. Well, first of all, I want everyone to know about your podcast. So if they go to, I think this is the best website, or if you're on your podcast app, you can search for Live Like You Love Yourself podcast and you can hear Chara and Maria talk. It's like having a chat with friends every single week. I love it. And then also I want to talk about this. Do I have this? YoginsUnited.com.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you want me to talk a little bit about it?
Yeah.
This is an organization that has been put together by Tara Brock and Jack Cornfield and a couple of other folks, really just around how to inform Yogins about voting, why it's important, and also just to support that process of registering to vote and taking action. We already have talked in here about, how do you take action? And we've talked a little bit about the fact that sometimes, we can have this tendency towards inaction. And so this, this organization has got the backing of, I think it's definitely more than 108, but it's probably somewhere in the couple of hundreds of yogis who are urging yogis to engage in conversation like this around the connections between yoga and politics, who are urging us as yogis to understand our responsibility, but not just our responsibility, the value of knowing what we believe and then of being in action around that. And so there are resources on the Yogins United page around where you can vote and getting more information about voting and how you can actually support the process of getting folks out to vote. So just some things you can do, things like registering to volunteer and engaging in conversations with friends and family, nothing partisan whatsoever, really just about urging folks to take action.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. I think how amazing would it be if all yoga teachers voted? Like all people who were looking at the yamas, the niyamas, the 8 limbs, who have like a lot of inner awareness, who are out serving and helping their communities. Those are the people I want to see voting.
I think conversations are so powerful, and that's been doing their podcast with Chara has just been. It's been such a life-changing, wonderful thing because to have people you can talk to about yoga. If I talk to anybody else about the stuff that Chara and I talk about, my friends would be like, "Please." Meanwhile, we sit there and we're just like, the sutra and it's amazing how nourishing it is. But also how much I've learned and how much I really feel like I have changed. And so in that way, I come to the conversation so receptive and so excited and so, psyched. So I think, and I love listening to conversation podcasts that have that quality of really exchanging. And you do the same on your podcast, Shannon. It's that feeling of really, I remember when was it you interviewing us or us to you? I mean, it felt so.
We were interviewing her. It was just a conversation, wasn't it? Wasn't any interview.
sort of hard to remember, but I just remember feeling that lovely sense of warmth and receptivity, and if that to me is the way to create connections, and if you can find people to have those conversations with about the stuff that you're interested in, but also the stuff that challenges you, it's fun to explore that, because it hasn't always been easy, has it, Chara? We've gone to places where it's been a little weedy.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Learn stuff about yourself, and that's
We
what this
do.
is all about. That's what this whole human project, being human project, is about. It's about learning about yourself, really.
Yeah.
That's so true. That is so true. Oh, that's so good. Yes,
Mm.
I will also link to that episode. It was you two interviewing me, but I was very hesitant to talk that day because everything had just happened with
Yeah.
the murder of George Floyd. And I just thought, what am I going to say?
Yeah.
I don't know what to say, but it was a good conversation. So tell us then, is there anything else that you'd like to kind of close off today with? Any thoughts of, how we can get through the next little bit if we're from the US, or how we can step forward and, take action?
Mm.
I think I mean, I kind of just want to reiterate what we have been talking about, the fact that it is our responsibility to ourselves and to our communities who we are a part of, who we are in constant relationship with, to take action, to be in action around things, to know what we believe in, even if it's just what we believe for now. And as a yoga teachers, I think it's also our responsibility um, to empower the people that we come in contact with, and to understand, or to begin to understand what they believe, and also to take action. And I think it's conversations like this, like Maria said, I think it's conversations like this that are incredibly useful and that will really guide the way for us moving forward, in part because they're just so nourishing and supportive, but we're also just sharing our own individual experiences of all of this. And in doing that, I think we're connecting with people who are just as confused and just as, riled up, and just as, perhaps dejected at times around this whole thing as we are. And when we recognize that we're all in this together, even though that sounds a little bit trite, like you hear that all the time. Yeah, we're all in this together. When we recognize that we're all in this together, I honestly feel like that is a foundation for us taking action. So thank you, Shannon, for all that you do in the world and for making conversations like this possible.
No, I think what Chara was saying is absolutely right, and what she was saying earlier, about it being sustainable. So I think the first thing is do your practice, whatever that is. Meet yourself on your cushion or your mat, or just in some kind of present, because that is the tapas to sort of have that consistency is the nourishment individually for what it is, and then I think as teachers, we make a community, and I love that little being a center of a little community. Whatever it is, they're around you and you engage, and those are powerful connections between you and your students, but also with the students and each other. And I think if we can support their centeredness and their safety and their resilience, and get them kind of thinking without but encourage action, I think is exactly right. And I think you're doing this, on a macro level with your connected yoga teacher community, creating that space, because feeling really alone can be very disempowering. And I think when you feel like we're all in this together, then I think it feels like it's not just you, and that's empowering.
Yeah. I truly believe community will sustain us. It is not a sprint, it is a marathon, as they said. I don't know how many times I've heard that one in the last year, but community will sustain us. And so I think we just have to all be willing to engage.
Yeah. And take the long view.
Yeah. And I love, Maria, how that you brought in also this idea of like show up for yourself first, like fuel yourself before you go out there, and then know when you need to step back and
if you find yourself stepping back, maybe you aren't nourishing yourself enough, because we can all be, if I'll just be relaxed when it's the temperature is 72 degrees and the sun is shining, and that's a very narrow window of tolerance. And the whole idea of yoga is that we get in there and then we begin to expand it, and so we can be challenged and kind of bounce back. So if you find yourself kind of narrowing, it's like, hang on a second, get comfy, and then start working on opening your tolerance for things. So.
That's really good. Thank you so much, both of you, for your time. The time goes very quickly when I talk to both of you. That's what I realized.
Great. Thank you so much, Shannon. It's fun as always.
It was.
Yeah. And let's continue the conversation. Maybe we continue it here in the thread, like the comments, or in the Connected Yoga Teacher group, or like you said, in your small yoga classes where you really nurture those people and then maybe have a conversation with them as well in different ways. So I'll put this website up again, the yoginsunited.com, and then also go and listen to Chara and Maria over on their podcast. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you again, Maria and Chara, for all of your time and wisdom, and for really, being up for talking about this, encouraging us to ask more questions, encouraging us to take a look at how yoga and politics are connected and what that means for our own yoga practice, our teaching, and for the work that we do in our communities. I have a huge shout out of gratitude for our team, because they know that today's episode was really hard for me to put together. I was really dragging my heels on it, flipped things around at the last minute, and they all have sailed along and just said, yeah, we can do this. So thank you so much to Suzanne, Crunch, Nick, and Sinead. I also want to thank you, Connected Yoga Teacher listener. Like I said earlier, you decided to show up and have a listen to this conversation. I would love to hear your key takeaways. What really stuck with you? What challenged you? What do you have a different opinion on? This is the beauty of discussions like this. We all have different life experience. We all have different ways of viewing the world. And I'm really hoping that we can continue this conversation inside of the Connected Yoga Teacher Facebook group. So if you're not already in there, come on over and join us. Drop your questions in there, search around. You can search for anything. There's years and years of posts in there that are amazing. And I also want to ask, and I want to take a deep breath here with you on this one, because I feel like I'm turning this around on myself this week, as well as asking you, what will you be doing this week to stay connected to yourself, your yoga practice, and to your community, so that you can continue to share the yoga that lights you up?